The debt collector's fist slammed into the car window, my son's school backpack still inside. I had one textbook and 30 seconds before they took everything. If I didn't stop him now, Leo would have no home, no father, and no future. My sister's voice cut through the chaos. You should have taken my help when I offered it. The locks clicked, the engine roared, and then I swung. The chalk snapped against the blackboard, leaving a jagged white streak through the date of the Bastille's fall. David Miller gripped the mahogany lectern, his knuckles turning the color of bone. A dull thud echoed in his chest, a heavy, rhythmic kick against his ribs that stole his breath. The lecture hall blurred into a sea of pixelated faces and glowing laptop screens. He tried to command his lungs to expand, but they remained rigid, frozen like rusted bellows. Gravity clawed at his shoulders. The linoleum floor rushed upward to meet him, cold and smelling of industrial wax, as the frantic scraping of chairs signaled the end of his silence. Fluorescent lights hummed a sterile, unwavering B-flat above his hospital bed. The air tasted of ozone and antiseptic. Dr. Aris moved with practiced, mechanical grace, flipping through a digital tablet that cast a pale blue glow over her tired features. She didn't offer a chair. Instead, she stood by the IV pole, her thumb hovering over the screen. The scarring on the ventricular wall is extensive, Professor Miller, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he'd expected from a harbinger of death. Your heart is simply out of time. David traced the plastic ridges of his wristband. His throat burned. Options? Palliative care. She tapped the screen, turning the tablet toward him. The numbers didn't register as currency at first, just a long, aggressive string of zeros trailing a 1. The stabilization treatments and the emergency bypass attempt have already pushed your outstanding balance to 7 figures. Your insurance provider flagged the claim an hour ago. They've denied the extension. The $1 million debt sat on his chest, heavier than the heart failure itself, crushing the last of his air. He felt the phantom pressure of his wife's grocery list in his wallet. Milk, eggs, detergent. The paper worn thin by his constant rewriting. He wasn't just losing his life. He was losing the ability to leave Leo with anything but a legacy of ash. The hospital released him not because he was better, but because he was a liability they could no longer afford to house. 2 days later, David sat in Marcus Reed's office. The room smelled of stale coffee and the metallic tang of an old radiator that hissed like a cornered snake. Papers were piled so high on Marcus's desk, they looked like a miniature skyline of failure. Marcus leaned forward, his chair groaning under the weight. He cracked his knuckles, thumb to pinky, a rapid-fire sequence of pops that echoed in the small space. I'm looking at the appeals, Dave. I really am. But the insurance company is acting like a stone wall. They aren't just saying no, they're saying never. David pressed 2 fingers to his carotid artery, counting the erratic skips in his rhythm. I don't have never, Marcus. I have weeks, maybe months if I'm lucky. Leo is 6. If I go under now, the state doesn't just take the house, they take him. The desk phone shrieked. Marcus didn't pick up, but the caller ID flashed a name that made David's stomach turn. Michael Davis. He's been calling every hour, Marcus whispered, his eyes darting to the flickering screen. The collector. He's not just sending letters anymore. He's calling the school. He's calling your neighbors. He called the dean, David said, his voice a dry rasp. They asked me to take a voluntary leave in the middle of the semester. They can't have a walking corpse representing the history department. The phone stopped ringing, only to start again 3 seconds later. The persistence was predatory, a rhythmic pounding on a door that was already splintering. David looked at the stack of denials. Each one was a locked door with the wrong key, a systemic refusal to recognize his humanity. He felt the weight of the $1 million again, a physical mass that made every breath a labor of mountain climbing. "We have to fight the repossession first," Marcus said, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. "If they take the car, you can't get Leo to school. You can't get to the clinic. It's the first domino." David nodded, but his mind was on the grocery list. Milk, eggs, detergent. He needed to rewrite it tonight. The original was in a plastic sleeve in his top drawer, the ink fading. If he didn't keep the list fresh, Sarah would disappear entirely, and he would be truly alone in this canyon of debt. The Atlanta sun was a hammer, beating the asphalt of the university parking lot into a shimmering, oil-slicked haze. The temperature hit 105 degrees, and the air felt like inhaling hot sand. David moved toward his old Volvo, his legs feeling like lead pipes. Each step was a calculation of energy he didn't have. A shadow detached itself from the side of a massive industrial light pole. Michael Davis was larger in person, thick-necked, wearing a suit that was a size too small, his military posture making him look like a block of granite. He stood in front of the driver's side door, his shadow falling over David like a shroud. "Professor Miller," Davis said. He didn't move. He stood uncomfortably close, invading David's space. He held a bottle of clear water and a bag of plain white crackers. He didn't look at David's face. He looked at the car keys clutched in David's shaking hand. "The grace period ended at noon. I'm here for the asset. I need this car to take my son to the doctor," David said, his voice trembling. "I have a stay on the eviction. The car should be protected." "The car is a separate line item," Davis countered, his voice a low, mechanical growl. He reached out, his hand closing over David's wrist. The grip was like a vice. "Give me the keys, David. Don't make this a scene in front of your students." Panic flared in David's chest, a sharp, searing heat that rivaled the sun. He felt his heart skip, a terrifying pause that made the world tilt. He couldn't lose the car. The legal documents, the original insurance policy, the appeals, the proof of Sarah's missed signature, were in the glove box. He swung his leather satchel. It wasn't a graceful move, but the weight of the 800-page hardcover history textbook inside provided a brutal momentum. The corner of the book caught Davis in the temple. The big man grunted, his grip loosening as he stumbled back against the hot metal of the car. David didn't wait. He scrambled into the driver's seat, the interior of the car smelling of scorched upholstery and old French fries. He jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a desperate whine. As he reversed, he saw Davis standing in the rearview mirror, wiping a smudge of dust from his forehead, his face pale and contorted with a visceral disgust. Not at the blow, but at the sight of a small red smear on his white cracker bag. David drove until his hands stopped shaking, winding through the gridlock of Atlanta until he reached the quiet, crumbling sanctuary of his home. The house smelled of damp cardboard and the lingering scent of Leo's apple juice. He found Leo in the living room, counting the stairs. 1, 2, 3, the boy whispered, his small curls damp with sweat. He didn't look up as David entered. 4, 5. "Hey, buddy," David said, sinking onto the bottom step. He stayed out of the way. He knew the rules. If Leo was interrupted, the world became unsafe. 6. Leo finished, then turned and threw his arms around David's neck. "You're late, Dad. I counted the stairs 4 times waiting. I know, Leo. The traffic was..." a mess. A sharp, rhythmic rapping at the front door made them both jump. It wasn't the heavy thud of a debt collector. It was a precise, demanding sound. David stood, his heart hammering against his ribs like a bird in a cage. He opened the door to find a woman who looked like a sharpened blade. Catherine Sterling stood on the porch, her charcoal silk suit pristine despite the sweltering heat. Her hair was pulled back so tight it seemed to pull the skin of her forehead smooth. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped past David into the hallway, her eyes immediately scanning the empty spaces where furniture used to be. "You look terrible, David," she said. Her voice was clipped, aristocratic. She adjusted the numbered tag on her sleeve, number 14. The Miller Constitution was always fragile, but this is a new low. "Catherine, what are you doing here? We haven't spoken since the funeral." "I'm here as a primary stakeholder," she said, turning to face him. She didn't look at Leo, who was hiding behind David's legs. "I didn't come to mourn, David. I came to collect. I am the lead investor in the agency that owns your medical debt. Every cent you owe for that failing pump in your chest is owed to me." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. The room seemed to shrink, the walls of the hallway pressing inward. You've been hounding me? You sent that man to the school?" "I sent a professional to recover an asset," Catherine corrected. She straightened a stray pen on the hallway table, making it perfectly parallel to the edge. "I've spent months orchestrating this, David. I knew you would fail. I knew you would let the insurance lapse, just like you did with Sarah. I'm not here to be a sister. I'm here to ensure that my nephew isn't raised in a house built on bad credit and broken hearts. You're going to sign over custody, or I'm going to let the debt crush you into the dirt." She left as quickly as she had arrived, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air like a threat. David collapsed onto the stairs, Leo's small hand finding his. The stair count started again, a soft, rhythmic prayer against the encroaching dark. Sleep was a luxury David couldn't afford, but his body forced it upon him in fitful, terrifying bursts. He woke the next morning with a plan born of desperation. If the traditional banks were closed to him because of Catherine's interference, he would go where the questions were fewer and the interest was higher. The pawn shop on the edge of downtown smelled of dust and desperation. Behind the bulletproof glass, a man with a stained tie looked at David's wedding ring and his late wife's gold watch. "I need an emergency loan," David said, sliding the items through the tray. $10,000, just to cover the next month of treatments." The man didn't even look at the jewelry. He tapped a few keys on a yellowed keyboard. "Miller, David? Sorry, pal. I can't touch you." "What do you mean? The watch alone is worth $5. "It's not the collateral," the man said, pointing to the screen. "Your credit has a red flag status. Litigation pending, asset freeze initiated. There's a note here from a Sterling Holdings. It says any lender providing funds to this account will be sued for interference with a primary creditor. You're radioactive, buddy. I can't even give you $20 for a bus pass." David walked out into the blinding light. Catherine hadn't just closed the doors. She had boarded them up. He was a man in a desert with a leaking canteen, and his sister was the one pouring sand into the wells. He returned home to find the house unnaturally quiet. "Leo?" "In here, Dad." David found him in his bedroom. On the bed sat a gleaming, silver toy robot. It was intricate, with glowing blue eyes and articulated joints. An object that cost more than David's monthly grocery budget. "Where did you get that, Leo?" "The nice lady," Leo said, his eyes wide. "She came by while you were out. She had a key. She said she was my Auntie Cat and that I should have better toys than wooden blocks." David felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with his illness. She had been inside. She had bypassed the locks he'd checked 3 times the night before. The sanctuary was gone. The monster wasn't at the door. It was already under the bed. He needed an ally. He arranged to meet a contact Marcus had mentioned, a fixer who specialized in predatory debt. The meeting was at a Greasy Spoon diner near the courthouse. The air was thick with the smell of burnt bacon and industrial cleaner. David waited in the back booth, his heart skipping every 4th beat. When the contact didn't show, he retreated to the restroom to splash cold water on his face. The room was a nightmare of cracked mustard-colored tiles and a single flickering fluorescent bulb that strobed every 2 seconds. He was drying his hands when the door swung shut. A man David didn't recognize, large, with a scar through his left eyebrow, stepped in. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a consequence. "Mr. Miller," the man whispered. He was picking at his cuticles, his fingers red and raw. "Miss Sterling doesn't like delays. She sent me to help you find your pen." He lunged. David felt a massive hand close around his throat, pinning him against the cold, damp tiles. The strobe light made the attack feel disjointed, a series of terrifying snapshots. Flash, a fist in his gut. Flash, the man pulling a legal document from his jacket. "Sign it," the man hissed. "Relinquish the boy. You're dying anyway. Why make it hurt?" David's vision began to swim. The lack of oxygen was a physical weight, a debt he couldn't pay. His hand fumbled along the sink, his fingers closing around a heavy, ceramic soap dispenser. With a desperate, primal grunt, he swung it upward. The ceramic shattered against the man's temple. Blood, dark and thick, sprayed across the mustard tiles. The grip on David's throat vanished. The man slumped to the floor, groaning, his hands going to his head. David scrambled for the door, his lungs screaming for air. He burst out into the diner, ignoring the startled looks of the patrons. He made it to his car, but as he turned the key, a white-hot spike of pain erupted in his chest. It wasn't just a skip this time. It was a total collapse of the rhythm. He slumped against the steering wheel, the world fading to a dull, gray hum as the smell of his own sweat and the ozone of a failing heart filled the cabin. He woke up in his own bed, the taste of copper in his mouth. Marcus was sitting in the chair by the window, his face shadowed. "You had a bad one, Dave," Marcus said. He wasn't looking at David. He was staring at his phone. David tried to sit up, but his limbs felt like they were made of water. "The diner. Someone attacked me." "I know," Marcus said. His voice was flat, devoid of the usual frantic energy. David reached for his water glass, but his hand brushed Marcus's phone, knocking it onto the floor. As he leaned over to pick it up, the screen lit up with a notification. "Subverted Phase 1. Build hope." David grabbed the phone, intending to hand it back. He felt a surge of gratitude for Marcus. Through the hospital bills, the threats from Davis, and the terrifying appearance of Catherine, Marcus had been his only anchor. He was the one who found the legal precedents, the one who took the late-night calls when David's panic attacks became too much to bear. Marcus was more than a lawyer. He was the brother David never had. David looked at the man, the messy hair, the tired eyes, and felt a wave of relief. As long as Marcus was in his corner, there was a chance. He was the smartest guy in the room, the one who knew how to navigate the shadows. Phase 2. False positive. "Here, you drop this," David said, holding out the device. Marcus smiled, a tired but warm expression. "Thanks, Dave." don't worry about the diner. I've already called a contact in the DA's office. We're going to file a restraining order against Catherine's associates. We're finally going on the offensive. You just rest. I've got the files right here. He patted his briefcase. We're going to win this. David felt his shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. The tension that had been a permanent knot in his spine loosened. They had a plan. They had a way out. Phase 3. The crack. Marcus's thumb swiped across the screen to silence a new message. But he was a second too slow. David's eyes, sharpened by years of grading fine print exams, caught the name at the top of the chat bubble. It wasn't the DA. It wasn't a legal contact. It was Catherine. And the message wasn't about a restraining order. It was a photo. A photo of David slumped over his steering wheel in the diner parking lot, taken from a distance. There is no legal strategy, David. You're a dead man walking. I'm just managing the estate. Marcus stood up, his posture shifting from slouching friend to cold auditor. She bought my firm's debt 6 months ago. I work for her. I've always worked for her. Every hope I gave you was just a way to keep you from seeking real help until it was too late for anyone else to step in. David looked at the man he had trusted with his son's future. The betrayal was a physical weight, more crushing than the heart failure. He wasn't just losing his life. He had been hand-delivered to his executioner by his best friend. Marcus tucked the phone into his pocket and headed for the door. She's coming for the boy tonight, Dave. You should probably get dressed. The world ended not with a bang, but with the rhythmic wheeze of an oxygen concentrator. David lay in the back of the ambulance, the siren's wail vibrating through the floorboards and into his very bones. The paramedics moved with a frantic, choreographed urgency, their faces blurred by the strobe of the emergency lights. He felt the cold bite of an IV needle in his arm, the metallic taste of adrenaline flooding his system. "Stay with us, Professor," one of them shouted over the roar of the engine. But David was drifting. He was thinking about the stair count. 1, 2, 3. He hoped Leo was counting. He hoped the rhythm could hold the world together while he was falling apart. He arrived at the hospital in a state of clinical chaos. The smell of industrial bleach burned his nostrils, a sharp, acidic scent that signaled the war against the invisible killers. Dr. Martinez was there, her white coat smelling of peppermint, humming "Happy Birthday" as she scrubbed her hands with a ferocity that turned her skin raw. "He's in full cardiac arrest," someone shouted. "Get the paddles. Clear." The shock was a bolt of lightning that tore through his chest, a violent, agonizing reset. His eyes snapped open to see the grandfather clock in the waiting room, the one with no hands. Time was moving, but it was no longer his. While David fought for his life in the ICU, the front door of his home was pushed open. Catherine Sterling didn't knock this time. She walked into the living room, her number 18 silk shirt reflecting the dim light. She looked at the empty spaces, the smell of damp cardboard, and the single velvet curtain. "Leo," she called out, her voice a sharp, commanding bell. The boy appeared at the top of the stairs, the silver robot clutched to his chest. "Where's Dad?" "Your father is very sick, Leo. He had to go away for a long time." She walked up the stairs, her heels clicking with a rhythmic, predatory precision. "But look at this place. It's messy. It's small. Wouldn't you like to stay in a palace? With a bed that has 3 sets of blankets and a view of the whole city?" "I have to count the stairs," Leo whispered, his lower lip trembling. "You can count the stairs at the hotel, Leo. There are hundreds of them. Come. The car's waiting." She didn't use force. She used the overwhelming gravity of her presence, the promise of an order that David could no longer provide. By the time the sun set over the Atlanta skyline, Leo was tucked into a massive, sarcophagus-like bed in a luxury suite. And David was a ghost in a sterile room, breathing through a mask. Morning brought a cruel flicker of hope. David woke to the sound of Dr. Martinez humming. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the monitor. "You're a miracle of stubbornness, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice clinical and cold. "But stubbornness doesn't pay the bill. A donor heart is available. It's a perfect match. But the hospital board requires a $500,000 deposit before we can prep the theater. Your insurance—" "I found a loophole," David rasped, his throat feeling like it was lined with broken glass. He pointed to the plastic folder on the bedside table. "My wife's policy. There's a rider. Catastrophic cardiac event resulting from secondary trauma. It bypasses the standard denial. It's there. Page 12. He felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The history teacher had found the hidden text, the one detail the predators had missed. He reached for his phone to call the insurance ombudsman, his fingers trembling with a frantic, desperate joy. The door opened. Catherine walked in, her face a mask of bored indifference. She didn't look at the monitors or the tubes. She looked at the phone in David's hand. With a movement so fast it was almost a blur, she snatched the device. She didn't put it in her pocket. She threw it against the industrial tile floor with a sickening crack. The screen shattered, the blue light flickering once, before dying. "You don't need to make any calls, David," she said. "The policy, Catherine, it covers it. I can stay. I can keep Leo." Subverted. Phase 1. Build hope. David pointed at the folder with a shaking hand. "Look at the dates. Sarah signed the rider 3 years before the accident. It's an ironclad clause. Even with the missed signature on the primary move, the rider is a separate legal entity. I spent all night, before the collapse, verifying the language. It's the survivor's shield provision. It was designed for exactly this. The money is there, Catherine. You can't stop the payout once the hospital files the claim. I'm going to live. I'm going to get the heart, and I'm going to take my son home." He felt a genuine spark of triumph. He had outplayed her. He had used her own world of fine print to build a fortress. Phase 2. False positive. Catherine picked up the folder. She flipped to page 12, her eyes scanning the text. For a moment, she went still. Her jaw tightened, and she looked at David with something that looked like genuine surprise, perhaps even respect. "The survivor's shield," she murmured. I hadn't realized Sarah was that thorough." "You're right, David. Under any normal circumstance, this would be an unblockable claim. The hospital would have their deposit in an hour." David let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for years. He closed his eyes, the sound of the heart monitor's beep sounding like a victory march. He had done it. He had saved Leo. Phase 3. The crack. "But," Catherine said, and the word was a cold, sharp blade. "You're operating on the assumption that this insurance company still exists as an independent entity." She pulled a small laminated card from her purse. It wasn't an insurance card. It was a corporate ID. David opened his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I don't like variables, David. And Sarah's policy was a variable." She leaned over the bed, her face inches from his. "I didn't just buy your debt. I bought the company that held the debt. And then, 3 months ago, I bought the provider that issued this policy." Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. David's heart did a terrifying, hollow skip. You bought the insurance company? It was a distressed asset, very easy to absorb into Sterling Holdings. She took a pair of surgical scissors from the tray, and with a slow, deliberate motion, she began to shred the Survivor's Shield page. As the primary shareholder and CEO, I issued a corporate directive last month. All Shield riders were declared actuarially unsound and voided. I didn't miss the loophole, David. I closed it. I spent $4 million to buy an entire company just to make sure this specific piece of paper would be worthless when you finally found it. The realization was a physical blow. She hadn't just been playing the game. She had bought the board, the pieces, and the room they were playing in. The hospital just received the notification, Catherine continued, dropping the shredded paper into the biohazard bin. Your funding is gone. The donor heart is being redirected to a patient in Savannah as we speak. You have exactly 1 hour of stabilization left before they move you to the indigent ward. She pulled a final document from her briefcase, the relinquishment of parental rights. Sign this, and I'll pay for the surgery out of my personal account. Refuse, and you'll be dead by sunset, and Leo will be a ward of the state. And we both know how the state treats children with unstable backgrounds. David Miller looked at the pen. It was a heavy, gold-plated thing, a symbol of the wealth that was currently suffocating him. He looked at Catherine, who was checking the numbered tag on her sleeve, number 1. The rotation was complete. She had won. But David was a history teacher. And history wasn't just a list of dates. It was a record of how the small and the desperate use the weight of the powerful against them. I'll sign, David whispered. But I need to see the medical consent form first. For the surgery. If I'm giving you my son, I need to know I'll actually be alive to see him grow up, even from a distance. Catherine sighed, a sound of imperial boredom. Fine. It's a standard form. Sign them both. She slid the papers across the rolling tray. David's hand was steady now. He didn't look at the custody papers. He looked at the medical consent form, the one Robert Thompson, his former student, had helped him review months ago when the debt first started mounting. Robert, the boy who counted ceiling tiles to map his escape. David signed the custody papers first. He felt a piece of his soul tear away as the ink dried. He was no longer a father. He was a party in a settlement. Then he turned to the medical consent form. Tucked into the middle of the 5-page document, in a font so small it required a magnifying glass, was a rider Robert had drafted. It was a conditional beneficiary trust. It stated that by signing the consent as the primary benefactor of the patient's care, the signer, Catherine, was legally establishing a constructive trust for the patient's dependents. In plain terms, the moment she signed that form to pay for his surgery, she wasn't just paying a bill. She was legally binding her entire fortune to Leo. If she ever tried to disinherit him, or if she died, every cent of the Sterling Empire would automatically transfer to an irrevocable trust that she could not touch. She was buying a son, but she was giving him the keys to her kingdom to do it. Catherine didn't read the fine print. She was too focused on the victory, on the relinquishment form clutched in her other hand. She scrawled her signature on the consent form, the gold pen scratching against the paper. There, she said, standing up. It's done. The doctors will be in shortly. I'll send a car for your things. She walked out, her heels clicking a triumphant rhythm. David lay back, the oxygen mask hissing. He had lost his son, but he had destroyed the monster. Leo would grow up in luxury, yes, but he would grow up with a power that Catherine could never take away. He had turned her greed into a cage. The surgery was a blur of cold steel and the smell of peppermint. David woke up weeks later in a small, quiet room in Chicago. The air was cold, the wind off the lake a constant, lonely hum. He sat on a park bench, watching a small boy in a distant playground. Leo was taller now. He was wearing an expensive coat, and a nanny stood nearby. But the boy was doing something that made David's heart, his new, strong, mechanical heart, ache. Leo was counting the slats on the park bench. 1, 2, 3. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver toy robot. It was a duplicate of the one Catherine had bought. He pressed a hidden button on the robot's heel. "Hi, Leo," David's voice whispered from the small speaker. It was a recording he'd made in the hospital, the night before the surgery. "If you're hearing this, it means the count is right. It means you're safe. I had to go away to make sure the monsters couldn't catch you. But I'm always watching the stairs. I'm always counting with you. You are the most important part of the ledger, buddy. The only part that ever mattered." David watched as Leo stopped counting. The boy looked around, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He didn't see David, hidden in the shadows of the gray stone buildings, but he felt the rhythm. David Miller turned and walked away into the Chicago wind. He was a man with no debt, no son, and a heart that beat with a borrowed rhythm. But as he walked, he whispered the grocery list under his breath: milk, eggs, detergent. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't sound like an empty cupboard. It sounded like a beginning.